us, and then we can open up the platform for any question and answers.
Okay, so I might not take 1 hour as such.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, sir, okay.
Huh. Is my slide still there?
Slide slide count
Move on. আপুনি কৈ দিয়ক কেনেকৈ কি কৰিব
Not done.
লাগে। কৈ দিয়ক একো নাই।
Hello, sir.
Yeah,
So your slide is not visible.
it's not visible.
Now. Yeah, now it's okay. Now okay. Now fine.
Okay, fine. Okay. Now I'm moving my slide. Is it moving?
Presentable not visible.
কৈ দিয়ক কৈ দিয়ক। Sir,
So can you make it in a presentable mode?
Presentable mode.
Yes.
Okay, just 1 second. So where do I get that option?
Just below corner there is an option. If you click, then PPT will be in a presentable mode.
Picture mode. On which side? On which side?
On the right below.
I'm seeing activities in the corner, right, left, activities, chat with everyone, show everyone, and meeting details.
হয়নে? Sir,
So maybe I should stop presenting for a while.
Okay. Sir.
Is it coming out well?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
log in online also. Oh, you can sit also if she wants.
Pranamika, is my slide moving now?
Oh, sir, can you please say? Yeah, yeah, it's moving. The slides are moving. Just telling the slides are moving. The slides are moving, huh? Telling.
Yes, sir. Slider moving.
Okay. So I think we are good to go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll begin in a minute. We can.
Yeah, maybe you can just start the introduction so that,
Okay, sir. Okay.
yeah.
A warm welcome to everyone. My name is Pranamika Daimari, and I take this opportunity to welcome you all for our first pre-GRM workshop session. I warmly welcome Dr. Rolwa Puya. Dr. Puya will be conducting the interactive session today. Dr. Puya is an assistant professor of sociology in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. Prior to this, he worked at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, New Delhi. He has been awarded the Raghunathan Family Fellow by the Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asian Institute, Harvard University. Dr. Puya has published in numerous journals, both national and international, and most recently his new book titled Nationalism in the Vernacular, State, Tribes, and Politics of Peace in Northeast India has been published by the Cambridge University Press. His research interest cuts across the themes of indigenous peoples' history, politics, development, violence, and borders in South Asia, and more particularly in India. His research work is located in the borderlands of India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, a region inhabited by multitudes of indigenous communities. This, this workshop session has been titled Methodological and Theoretical Aspects of Drafting a Research Paper. I now hand over to Dr. Puya to begin the session.
Yeah, okay. I hope I'm audible. So is it okay if I switch my video off? Because I think everyone is off.
So you can keep the video on.
I can keep the video on.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay, yeah.
I would also request the participants to, if possible, to switch on a few videos.
Okay. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. And I thank the organizing team of the Grazer Research May 2023 at the Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Guwahati, for inviting me to have this interactive session on theory and methods in social science research. Also, IIT Guwahati has, at some point was a home for me as well. And, it always feels good to be back, and particularly to also contribute, to some of the departmental activities. So my talk will be short and preliminary, and in the sense that, when Pranamika reached out to me, so she was insisting that, we had an interactive session. So I would, definitely be more keen to have an open discussion with all of you. My talk will have, the session have, I split it into two parts. One will basically look at, foreground, the relationship between theories, theoretical framework, and research methodologies. And the other part will basically be a reflection of my own personal journey as a social science researcher. So as you can see, I'm also still very young. I'm also still learning how to do the art of research. I'm also, a struggling academic. So in that way, my talk will also be, not very clear, in a sense that, I'm also still grappling with, many of the theories and methodological issues concerning social science research. So to start with, theories and methods, are the backbones of research. And for any kind of research endeavor, we need to have a theoretical framework and methodology. Now, and in many ways, it is also important, this uh, theory or theoretical framework and methodology is important in a sense that they are also deeply interlinked in terms of, the ontological and methodological foundations of, whether you are, doing a quantitative study or whether you are doing a qualitative study. Now, one of the issue I don't know that I face, maybe some of you might also be facing, is this $1 million question of what theoretical framework and methodology should I use for my research. Now I think at some point of time all of us are struck with this question, and it is also important because when we are going to because as a doctoral student or someone who is in academic, we are expected to write an academic paper, we are expected to produce a thesis, we are expected to produce writings in different forms. Now in all kinds of writings, particularly in academia, we need a theoretical framework and a methodology. Now, the problem with this theory and methodology largely is in terms of finding the right or appropriate theoretical and methodological framework. Now, as a researcher, some of the recurring questions that we face are: how do I find a theory? Basically, how do I select a theory? And what determines my choice of what theoretical framework I'm using, and what methodological paradigm I will be following. And the other question is what on what basis are we deciding what theoretical framework and methodology we should be using for our research. Now if you look at it, if you look at social science literature, you'll see that there are a whole lot of theoretical frameworks, and sometimes it may be that we are cherry picking the kind of framework that we are going to use without much of a conviction. For example, some of the popular theoretical frameworks of contemporary times or even in the past, which continue to have a lot of relevance even today, are say intersectionality, subaltern, political economy, space, constructivist, ethno-symbolist, accumulation by disposition, so on and so forth. Now the list is very long. Now two things always come to mind is: one is that on what basis are we deciding that I'm going to use intersectionality as my theoretical framework, or I'm going to use the subaltern framework as my study? Is it that we are deeply inspired by the work of Ranajit Guha, that we wanted to prove and verify how the theory is relevant, rather than really contributing to the existing theoretical framework or theoretical knowledge that are already in place? Second is that are we choosing theoretical framework on the basis of our own convenience? So these are some of the questions that a researcher continue to grapple with. Now I just want to spend some time trying to outline what is theory and what is theoretical framework. Now in social science, any kind of definition, any kind of concise or accepted definition which is being used all over the world, or a universalized definition, is something which is very, very rare to come by. So likewise, even in the case of theory, this is the exact condition, that there is no general, there is no one single definition of what constitute a theory. However, in the context of research methodologies, what is a theory in terms of whether you are doing a quantitative or a qualitative study? So what constitutes a theory is more or less the same. Now one way of understanding theory is that theories are largely abstract, something which which we are what is it designing from, or which we are coming up with the kind of concept, the kind of which we are moving or which we are designing on the basis of the kind of concepts that we have. So generally, theory is largely a kind of abstract description. Now, a theory can be supported by preliminary data or by a vast body of research. And the more data that we have, the more the theory becomes stronger. Now, data can varies, whether you are a historian, whether you are a sociologist, a political scientist, whether you're an archaeologist, so on and so forth. A more important question, rather than, trying to understand what is theory, a more important question is theory singular? Now, in social science, we know that, our disciplines, or our, profession in social science, it's characterized by these multiple theoretical orientations. And at times, we also find that, these theoretical orientations are competing and contesting, one, against each other. And this is something which is quite distinct about, social science research. Now, if you talk about natural science, or if you talk about, disciplines beyond social science, you will see that, the way in which they engage with theory is, very, very little. But when it comes to social science, one distinct feature is that, social science is characterized by multiple theoretical orientations. And, we will hardly come to this consensus of, what theory is best in terms of explaining, the social phenomena that we study as a social scientist. So therefore, theories, comes in different meanings, different shapes. It has, its own orientations. Some theories can be very, very ideological. Some theories, can be part of, some kind of socio-political movements. For example, feminist theory, is a very, very good example. You cannot take, feminist movements out of feminist theory. Likewise, subaltern theory also, the idea of, subaltern. You cannot take, out, different kind of socio-political movements from, subaltern studies. So in that way, there can be theories, which are descriptive in terms of naming and characterizing a phenomenon. There can be theories which are explanatory. There can be theories which are disruptive in terms of, challenging existing knowledge or refuting it. Again, subaltern studies is a very good example. And currently, there is a lot of, academic debates and discussion around the idea of, critiquing the mainstream social science theory in terms of being dominated by the global north, for instance. Or there can be theories, which are predictive in terms of trying to predict an outcome based on specific inputs. Likewise, we can have theories, which tries to give a universal explanation about a phenomenon. For example, Marxist theories of society. Now, Marxists believe that, the kind of economic explanations that Marx offer in terms of how society progressed from one stage to the other stage is universally acceptable. So we can have, that kind of grand theories. Likewise, you can have middle range theories like, actor network theory. And then there are theories, that address, the more, micro aspect of human lives, such as symbolic interactionism. So most of you who come from the background of sociologists and political scientists, I am sure, you must be aware about, these different theories. At the same time, there are also, multiple theories that can, inform, or that can offer us different perspectives about a single phenomenon. Now, for example, talk about human agency. Now, agency can be defined as the extent to which individuals are able to exert control in their personal and social lives. Now, whereas, we might be using, agency very casually, but then if we dig into, how different scholars have, conceptualized the idea of agency over time, you will see that, it has been used variously by different scholars. For example, one of the most, renowned sociologists who have conceptualized agency is Anthony Giddens. Now, how Anthony Giddens, conceptualized agency might be significantly different from how Bourdieu or Judith Butler talks about agency. Likewise, there are different theories of globalization, and the way in which, social theorists like Zygmunt Bauman, Anthony Giddens, or Sesson Ulrich Beck talks about globalization, the kind of theoretical framework that they offer might be significantly different. So the point is that, for even a singular phenomenon, even if we are going to study, something, a singular phenomenon, there can be multiple theoretical standpoints in which we can understand and approach one single phenomenon. Likewise, I'm a student of ethnicity and nationalism, and within ethnicity and nationalism also, there are multiple contesting theories. And what we have is that, these theories are not mere theories. These theories also emerge in a context that they challenge and critique the older theories. For example, within ethnicity and nationalism studies, primordialism was something which was very, very common till the 1950s and the 1960s. And by the 1960s onwards, the idea of primordialism, that identity as being, natural and given, is being challenged and critiqued by, scholars who comes from the modernist and the constructivist school. Now, in India also, we have, scholars like, Paul Brass, talking about, the relationship between ethnicity and elites. So likewise, over time, sociologists like Anthony Giddens formulate their own theoretical framework in terms of trying to explain the persistence of, ethnicity and nationalism in contemporary period. So for Anthony Giddens, there is no total break between, so Anthony Giddens, in other words, Anthony Giddens is trying to give us a middle, not Anthony Giddens, Anthony Smith, sorry. Anthony Smith is trying to give us a middle ground between primordialists and constructivists. So you see that, the primordialists emerge as a critique of, the constructivists emerge as a critique of primordialists, and the ethnosymbolists emerge as, a critique of both the theories, where, it is trying to find the middle ground. Now, the other is, moving from theory to theoretical framework. Now, a theoretical framework is a logically developed and connected set of concepts and premises developed from one or more theories that a researcher creates to scaffold a study. Now, for this, the researcher has to define the concepts and theories that will provide the grounding of the research, unite them through logical connections, and relate these concepts to the study that is being taken out. So, to put it in a very simple language, theoretical framework is a reflection of the work the researcher engaged in to use a theory in a given study. Now, I just, to elaborate on the last point, theoretical framework is a reflection of the work that the researcher is engaged in. Now, all of us, have our own, our own subjective or, our own objective claims about, or say our own orientations about certain theoretical framework. Now, our decisions or, our reason for choosing certain theoretical framework, there can be some kind of, underlying assumptions about, the kind of, ontological and epistemological reality or epistemological foundation of the theoretical framework that you are applying. So the point is that, you cannot, as a researcher, we cannot dissociate our methods from our theoretical framework. So we cannot, so I am going to, come to this in the next next 3 or 4 slides, how methods and theories are interlinked. Now, the issue is that, the two cannot be taken apart, and the two has to go together. So our decisions about, how we decide a theoretical framework largely depends upon the kind of methodologies that we use. And again, these methodologies have their own philosophical underpinnings, where there are certain epistemological basis in which, the two broad research methodological paradigms work and operate. Now let us, try to understand this. I know that, there are more than, the use of quantitative and qualitative is quite common. So I'm going to restrict myself to, these two. I'm aware that, there are people, there are scholars who use the mixed method research. There are scholars even who are uncomfortable with the idea of making this distinction of quantitative and qualitative. Many will use the positivist paradigm or the anti-positivist paradigm, right? So on and so forth. But for this presentation, I think, restricting ourselves to quantitative and qualitative makes more sense. So now, quantitative and qualitative methodologies are definitely, distinct in their own ways, but at the same time, it they are not only methodologies in a sense that they are about the way we look at the world. So a quantitative researcher definitely will have his or her own way of looking at the world. Likewise, to identify oneself as a qualitative researcher means that we agree to the philosophical underpinnings of qualitative research. Now, let us look at the distinction between the two. The first distinction is that quantitative is objectivist deductive approach. That is, it moves from theory to data. Now, in the case of qualitative, it is the subjectivist inductive approach. That is, it moves from data to theory. So I have briefly mentioned this in my abstract for the presentation as well. Now, what we have is that in the case of quantitative study, in the case of quantitative research, basically research is something which is a top-down approach. That you move from abstract conceptualizations, and then you operationalize your methodology, you operationalize your concepts, you have hypotheses, and then you come out with the findings. Now, in the case of qualitative, it's the exact opposite. It is a bottom-up approach. Now, researcher does not necessarily have a preconceived or a predetermined theoretical framework. Rather, the researcher begins with a desire to understand or explain a particular phenomenon. And now, this happened largely because in the case of quantitative researcher, there is a strong belief in the idea of objective reality. Whereas in the case of qualitative researcher, they follow this, they claim that reality is something which is subjective. Now, so for example, this is a very important distinction between quantitative and qualitative. Now, for a quantitative researcher, the objective reality means that reality is external to us, that it exists independent of the researcher. Now, so therefore, reality can be understood by collecting objective, unbiased data about the reality. So the assumption is that the researcher does not necessarily, the values of the researcher does not necessarily influence the outcome of the research. Now, this is something which is being widely accepted in the field of natural science. And when disciplines such as sociology emerged, the early sociologists, the pioneers like Emile Durkheim, August and many others tried to emulate this idea of positivist tradition within social science, right? Now, in the case of qualitative research, what we have is that it claims that it makes a contrary claims where qualitative researchers hold the view that our realities are multiple, that there are multiple realities. So there can be multiple explanations about a single phenomenon. For example, discrimination, poverty, inequality, stratification, so on and so forth. Now, for qualitative researchers, the reality that a social science researchers study is something which is socially and experientially constructed. Now, reality is never stable. Now, in the case of quantitative research, reality is always stable. It is fixed. It is given. Now, for the qualitative researcher, reality is subjective. And as a researcher, we can be biased, in terms of our biasness, as being part of the society can influence and shape, our research outcome, our research questions, our methodologies as well. So these are, this is, giving you a kind of broad distinction between quantitative and qualitative research, in the sense that they are not merely two methodological paradigms, but there are some philosophical underpinnings behind the two methods. And it is important that to decide. It is important to acknowledge that once we say that I am doing a quantitative research, I am doing a qualitative research, it means that we also abide by the kind of philosophical underpinnings that these two methodologies have. Now, to elaborate a bit on the two methodologies. So, like I said, quantitative research is more or less a kind of top-down approach. Now, when a researcher engages in a quantitative research, theory is generally the starting point for the research project. So basically, in quantitative research, you engage with a lot of literature review. You try to identify the gaps. At the same time, you also come up with the kind of concepts. You operationalize the concepts, right? So you start with the theory. So before doing the actual research in terms of doing the field work or the field study, you start with the theory. You already have your theory or the theoretical framework that you are going to use. Now, the theory that we use in that that are used in quantitative research or that are used by quantitative researcher, they offer testable components. That is, components such as trying to understand the relationship between two things. For example, what is known as cause and effect relationships. Now, the concepts should be operationalized and the variables that are relevant to control. Now, for quantitative researcher, a good theory in this approach typically builds on previous work, and their own study can potentially add to the kind of knowledge that is being already there. So there is a linear progression that needs to be followed, that is from theory to hypothesis development to data collection to interpretation of findings to the refinement of theory or the generation of new causal explanations. Now, any quantitative researchers will begin by identifying the theory, basically the concepts, the kind of framework from which they will conduct the study. Now, again, qualitative is something which is, quite opposite to quantitative, in the sense that in the case of qualitative study, you are never sure about your theory, in the sense that the theoretical framework is unstable. It is not stable, it is not fixed. Rather, it is something which is constantly evolving, informed by researcher experience, values, and perception. So qualitative study, more or less, it is flexible. It gives you, the kind of liberty and freedom, to make changes, as you go along while doing the research. So the researcher collects data about the phenomenon and searches for patterns across the data to generate an understanding of the phenomenon. A common approach to subjectivist inductive research involves exploring a phenomenon in a specific context, often via interviews, focus groups, and observations. Now, the methodologies that we choose as a researcher determines the kind of data we are getting, and that in effect is determined by the tools of data collection that we use. Now, for example, in the context of qualitative research, the researcher can be engaged in theory building along with the research participants. Now, the role of the research participant is not mere responding to the queries that the researcher have. The research participants can also be actively involved in the construction of the research work by the researcher themselves. So therefore, in qualitative research, theory building can be something which is being co-produced between the researcher and the research participants. And as with the researcher, one can have many theories in mind when designing the study based on the kind of literatures that we read. And it is not until data analysis processes are underway that the researcher will determine which theory or theories should shape the final study interpretations and conclusions. So throughout the research process, it is not necessary, if you are an ethnographer, if you are saying that I'm doing an ethnography, it is not necessary that you already have theory when you go to the field. Rather, sometimes it can be possible that you have some theories in mind, but it is not necessary that you try to go improve that particular theory, whether the theory is valid or not. So sometimes it can also be possible that you develop your own theory, or you can advance the existing theories. So in qualitative research, what you have is that the researcher can build the theory over the course of his or her research. Now, this is what I was trying to explain, basically, in the case of quantitative research and in the case of qualitative research. Now, like I said, quantitative research is something which is, it follows a top-down approach. In the case of qualitative research, it is largely a bottom-up approach. So I will quickly run through some few slides, basically to unpack how I did my work, how I applied. I'm a qualitative researcher. I have a very poor knowledge in quantitative research. I hardly do any kind of quantitative study. So throughout my academic career, it is very short yet, but still I have been doing qualitative research. So, as Pranamika mentioned, I came out with this book recently, titled "Nationalism in the Vernacular: State, Tribes, and the Politics of Peace in Northeast India" with Cambridge University Press. Now, uh, my intention here is to, to have a short engagement in terms of how I came up with the idea of vernacular nationalism and how I build, theory from my data. As a qualitative researcher, I do have, some kind of theoretical knowledge before I went to the field. But then when I go to the field, I develop, a different understanding of what nationalism is, particularly in the context in which I was doing my field work. Now, the book broadly, make three arguments. One is that it interrogates the relationship between orality and nationalist politics. Second is it examines this relationship between orality and nationalist politics through the vernacularization of politics and nationalist ideas by exploring the divergent ways in which Mizo localized expressions by using terms such as Zalen, freedom, Ramle, Namtan for territory and nation, and how different genres of songs were composed that articulate the kind of political aspirations. It also tell us about the kind of dissent and disenchantment that Mizos were facing during the 20 years of the MNF movement. Now, by and large, it argues that this was vernacularization at work, where political ideas and imaginations, idioms and practices, and loss and suffering were articulated in the local that reflected the agency of the Mizos. Now, this is the broad argument. Now, what I wanted to do in the next few maybe 10 minutes is how did I came up with this idea of vernacular nationalism. So uh, I wanted to start this reflection with the time I was doing my PhD. So when I did my I began my field work for my PhD in January 2015, and one of the things that was quite striking was the way in which the way in which my research participants, basically who were the former MNF rebels. So uh, my research is about the Mizo national movement that began in the year 1966 and it ended in the year 1986 with the signing of the Mizo Accord. Now, one of the question, one thing that was, that struck me when I started my field work was the way in which the former MNF rebels or former the MNF rebels position themselves. Now, this is important in terms of the framing of the movement. Before that, when I was, when I was doing my coursework and when I began to develop my proposal, one of the key questions that I have in my mind is something which have been used widely in the context of nationalism research, is that why do people rebel? So my intention was to understand or explore why do Mizos rebel? What drive them to armed rebellion? So, but when I went to the field, in doing so, my intention was to understand, the memories of the people in relation to the movement and how they position themselves. Now, when I went to the field, I found that, many of the former MNF rebels identify themselves to me as song composers. And as my field work and interviews, with them progress, I was also, alerted or informed that, many of the former MNF leaders, including the current Chief Minister of Mizoram, Puzoram Thanga, they have, composed songs. They have written about the movement during the movement itself, and they have, used certain specific terms and categories. Particularly, for example, Zalenna, that is freedom, freedom. Now, I began to dig into the idea of this Zalenna and started, looking at, how the MNF leadership as well as the common people give, what does, this idea of Zalenna means to them. Now, this is something which is very significant in a sense that if you look at the kind of existing literature on the MNF, you will see that, the common terms that are being used are insurgency, ethnic conflict, terrorism. Now, in Northeast India, if some of you are working on Northeast India, you will see that any kind of political, socio-political movements are homogeneously clubbed as insurgency. Now, this clubbing of insurgency is not only statist, but it is also simplistic and convenient, because the kind of socio-political movements that we have that are there in the Northeast does not emerge, in the same historical context. They don't emerge because of the same reasons. There are varying reasons as to why people rebel in the Northeast. Now, in my everyday conversations with research participants, every time, many of them refer to the movement as Zalen Naswal, that is freedom struggle, and the sacrifice they made as Ramle and Namtan, territory and nation. So the 20-year sacrifice that they have made is for the territory and nation. So I begin to, explore this, and what I have observed is that, the idea of Zalenna and Ramlenam was something which was being integrated into the ideology of the MNF movement. Now, it made appearance not only in the pamphlets, in the kind of materials that were being produced by the MNF, but also it was integrated into the songs that were composed during the period of the movement. Now I began collecting, songs that were composed by the MNF rebels, and later on I realized that, it was not only the MNF rebels who composed songs. Even people who were not necessarily part of the movement were also engaging in, composing songs, expressing, their support, or expressing their, dissent against the movement. So what I have seen is that, existing literature on the MNF movement, or the wider, socio-political writings about the Northeast India, there is a total erasure of the political agency of the communities and homogenization of socio-political movements through the use of terms such as insurgency, ethnic conflict, terrorism, so on and so forth. So these kind of, literatures are, to me, very linear in their simplistic narration of the movement that trace it from the famine and end with the signing of the Mizo Accord. So basically, it does not really tell us, the ideologies behind the movement. It does not, give any kind of voice and representation of the people, who have struggled and who are struggling. Now, what do I mean by vernacular nationalism? Now, as vernacular nationalism, is central, to the book, and the idea of the vernacular in particular is, is evident, across, the chapters of the book. Now, what I mean by vernacular nationalism basically is how the ideas of nations and nationalism, which are considered to be something which is very modern, and in the literature of ethnicity and nationalism, the idea of, nationalism is something which is very, very Eurocentric, something that, scholars like Partha Chatterjee has, critiqued. Now, in my work, what I try to do was that, I have seen, my argument is that the Mizos have reframed and reconstructed the modern ideas of nationalism or nation into their own context. So there was a reframing of the idea of the idea of the nation. So in this reframing, something that was, recurring was the instrumental role that songs, played during the entire period of Mizo movement. Now, at one level, songs, by virtue of, their, oral nature, it was, easily receptive, to the, large, to the Mizo communities. For example, even today, Mizo communities, Mizo society continue to be largely an oral society, and the MNF, creatively tap into the oral culture of the Mizos. Now, at another level, what I have observed is that how the idea of Zalenna and Ramlenam were about creating a vernacular language where the ideas of nation and nationalism were reframing the local. Now, what we have essentially is that by using these vernacular terms such as Zalenna and Ramlenam, the language in which, MNF leaders were communicating and disseminating the ideas of nationalism was something which was receptible, or, which was something that is easily understood by everyone. So in the process, what we have is that, Mizo nationalism was a product of both the elites as well as the non-elites. So this is something, which I get it when I was in the field. So when I came back from the field after doing, almost a straight 7 to 8 months field work and then going back and forth, now I begin to look at, a possible theoretical framework that could potentially explain, what I'm trying to say. Now, coming back, I have come across significant works that try to engage with the kind of the kind of engagement that I have. For example, Lucian Miseluti, in the context of political culture in North India, particularly the Yadavs, have employed the term vernacularization of democracy. In another context, J.R. Fiami has looked at how non or how literate and non-literate cultures shape the making of modern Egyptian identity. And closer to home, we have ELAP Waters, who have done an excellent work on how Nagas creatively adapt modern ideas of democracy in their own context. So these kind of socio-anthropological works were something which was already available, but which I make use of in terms of framing what I mean by nationalism in the vernacular or vernacular nationalism. Now another theoretical framework that I was deeply inspired with is scholars who examine the idea of everyday nationhood. Now when one talks about nationalism, we often relate it to the kind of aggression, or we relate it to we relate it to conflict, we relate it to war, we relate it to exclusivism, right? Now what scholars particularly from the work of Michael Billig, which he which he from based on a book he published in the year 1995, known as Banal Nationalism, he shifts our attention to how people might relate to the idea of nation in their everyday life, consciously or unconsciously. So nationalism is not just a violent expression. Nationalism can be expressed in it appears in multiple forms, maybe in terms of dress, in terms of food, in terms of our everyday life. So what my biggest takeaway from these scholars who have written about everyday nationhood is their focus on the agency of the communities. Now in my case also, my argument was that Mizo nationalism was not only a construct of people who are part of the MNF movement, but Mizo nationalism was a construct of the elite as well as the ordinary Mizos. So by and large, this is a summary of what I try to convey in my book. One is vernacular nationalism, which basically means the reframing and reconstruction of the idea of the nation in local terms, making it distinctively Mizo. Now, this idea of vernacular nationalism also remains helpful to me in trying to explain and understand contemporary Mizo politics. So the point being that many existing work on Mizo movement or on Mizo politics, particularly in relation to the MNF movement, somehow bury Mizo nationalism with the signing of Mizo Accord in 1986. So there is no scope of talking about Mizo nationalism post 1986. But then if you look at the past 5 to 6 years, we have seen that if some of you are aware that there are several socio-political mobilizations in Mizoram that have a very very strong nationalist fervor. Sometimes it can make its appearance in terms of anti-minority sentiments such as the Chakmas and the Bruce. Sometimes it can made its appearance in terms of showing solidarity to the refugee crisis in Myanmar. So it comes in many forms and multiple forms. And in this kind of occasions, Mizo as a community fall back to the oral culture in terms of mobilizing the wider public. So this is essentially how I went about doing a qualitative research by moving from data to theory. So this is basically what I have to say. Now these are some of my published works. So I was requested by a faculty from IIT Guwahati to show my published works so that some of you get inspired and also try to write or publish. These are some of the published works that I have in edited book. These are in journals. And yeah, it's my book that just recently came out. So I will be happy to take any questions. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Puya. It was indeed a very enriching session. And I know there'll be definitely a lot of questions that our participants would love to interact with you and to ask you. So I now open the floor for further discussions and questions, and I request the participants to please unmute themselves, introduce themselves, and begin your questions to Dr. Puya.
Hello.
Yes.
Uh, just should I come back? I'm in the same hall.
Hello, Dr. Puhia. Um, I am from the sociology discipline of. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes. So I'm from IIT Guwahati, and I am doing my PhD in sociology. So I just finished my field work, and I have compiled my data and have basically gone through data analysis. So I was just wondering, like I kind of relate to a lot of what you spoke about qualitative work and how you go to the field with and you build theories from there. But it's also true that when we go to the field and try to collect data, we also carry along a lot of who we are, right? Like we where do we come from and how do we perceive things. That I think that also is something that we carry along with us while we go to the field and try to collect data. That is a question for you, and in that case, when we are formulating theories and when we are actually building a narrative, how do we defend a narrative in that context when of course if there is a possibility that we as like our what do you say our background or where we come from actually it does influence the data we collect. So that is my question. Thank you.
Okay. Am I to take more, or
Do you need to take more
should
or
I respond?
you can actually answer the question now, and then if
Okay.
there's a
Yeah.
question later on, then you can actually take it.
Yeah. I think it is a good question in a sense that, you started by acknowledging that there is a lot of subjectivity involved in doing a qualitative research, right? So, but then I would say that, as a sociologist, we look for patterns. We look for patterns, and particularly in the context, in my own context, what I have seen is that something that is coming back and forth all the time when interviewing, my research participants, not only in Aizawl but everywhere in Mizoram. I travel quite extensively when I was doing my field work. I traveled in Manipur. I traveled to Tripura as well. Something that is, something that, it is a qualitative study, but something that is coming back and forth all the time, or something which is recurring, is the idea of Zalenna freedom. Now, as a qualitative researcher, we try to understand things from the perspective of the people that we study. We try to put, our respondents' voice at the heart of our study. Likewise, in theorizing also, what we essentially try to do is that our theorization should be based on, the kind of field data that we collected. In a sense that even if our researchers, if our research respondents are reading our work, they should feel that, this is how they would like to be represented. Now, like I said, in my case, when I was reading literatures, say on Northeast India studies in relation to MNF movement, and given that there are several socio-political movements in the Northeast, so most books, say use the term insurgency. Now, none, even till today, many of the MNF former MNF rebels refuse to be identified as insurgents, right? Now, whose voice should we privilege? Should we privilege the voice of you know uh, the other, in terms of people who are labeling the movement as insurgency, or should we privilege, the voice of the people or the community that we are studying who refuse, that kind of label, right? So yes, our own subjective biases, can shape and influence, how we look at things. But then I think it is, we can resolve or, reconcile to a very large extent if we try to put the voice of our respondents, at the forefront of our research study. That is how I would like to put it.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to ask questions? You can also write your questions on the chat box, which would be taken up, and we'll proceed with that. Yeah, so is there anyone else who would like to ask?
Yeah, I would love to ask a few questions actually. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Hello, sir. I'm Nayan Moni Kumar from Guwahati University, Department of Political Science. I don't have a question per se, but I have during my field work I face two difficulties. So it's more like a problem. So what happens is that I basically study the Mia. I'm basically working on the identity question of the Mia Muslims in Assam. And what happens is that the problem that I'm having at this moment is that in the first phase of my field work, I basically talk to people coming from the middle class from within the community. Uh, but what happens is that when I go to the remote areas, when I go to Chor Saporis, where people will be mostly coming from non-middle class background, one of my fear is that the questions that I'm raising, they may not be that relevant to. I don't know how far it will be relevant to them, because I got an opportunity to talk to a few laborers, and the questions that I raised, in my study, they were while they were very important for the middle class Mias, those were a kind of those those questions may be a bit distant from the more from people coming from the remote areas. I don't know. So that is one of the dilemma that I'm having. And another dilemma that I'm having is that there's this work that there's this paper that I was working on, and I submitted this paper for a journal, and they gave me good response. But the point is that uh, in the paper, I was working on the identity question of the indigenous Muslims in Assam. Now, what happens is that I talked to 25 indigenous Muslims, and the data was based on, and I did not pre-select the data, like having 25 Muslims as my respondents, but I kind of fixated the number based on the data saturation that I managed to achieve. Now, what happens is that one of the response that I got was that like is this enough to understand the whole phenomenon? That I don't know, but I somehow managed to I got the saturation of data, but the question that the reviewers raise is that, is it enough? Now, so how do we deal with this? I don't see this as a question, but these are problems that I'm having at this moment. Would love to have your opinion on this, sir. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I think someone else was raising hand, no? So maybe I can take the
It's me
question.
only. It's me only.
Okay, so okay.
Yeah, there's Debasmita who also wanted to ask a question. Um,
Okay, yeah, I got the question. Yeah.
so you can
So
probably
yeah,
ask both. I
yeah.
mean, answer both. Yeah.
Yes. So let me start with the first question by Nayan. Uh, well, from the question, from your framing of the question, it's understandable that you are also doing a qualitative research. And I think this is something which a qualitative research commonly face. For example, in my case also, when I was doing my field work, I never had this in mind that I will travel extensively across Mizoram, Tripura, and Manipur. So I was trying to restrict myself to Aizawl. Now I struggle for the first initial 3 months, but then from the third month, after completing 3 months of my field work, from the fourth months, things become very smooth for me. And in 1 month, my data was like more or less saturated. And later on, I also realized that my data was something which was very urban, and which was also very elite centric. that people in Aizawl, who have access to different kinds of socio-cultural, political capital, who have, the kind of platforms, who are literate, who can write, who appear in TV debates, so on and so forth. So it is basically, these narratives that I was getting. Basically, I was getting a very, narrow narratives. Now, what changed? What changed was that, I made a point that, I will travel extensively all across Mizoram and talk to, as many people as possible. Now, after, doing that, so I think you are also, in the same part. So one good thing about qualitative research is that, you have the flexibility to change, right? So in my presentation also, that is what, I try to convey, that when you are doing a qualitative research, it is not a fixated research, that, you have to progress from one stage to the other stage. It is not that, your questions, are written in stone. Your research questions can be changed, according to the situations that you are facing. Now, some of the questions that may be relevant for the middle class MIA may not be relevant for the, different sections of the MIA communities, right? So I think, as per the kind of, methodology that you are using, that is totally fine, and it's quite normal to me. Just excuse me for 1 minute. Uh, Sorry. So the other is that, I don't know, because I have not read their papers, so I don't know in what context the reviewer are, asking me that question. But then I think it might be helpful to make, to tighten the argument, and also relate it more effectively, to the data that you are presenting. For example, if you are doing a qualitative research, at the heart of qualitative research is to be able to provide a thick description, right? That is what Clifford Geertz, says, lies at the heart of ethnography. Now, many people claim that, they're doing ethnographic research, but without really providing us a thick description of a particular phenomenon. Now, I think, the question is not may not be necessarily about, how many people are interviewing, but it might have to do with, the way in which you are presenting your data, whether, you are describing it thick enough, right? Whether you are so qualitative researcher, or particularly who are doing ethnographic research, it is like, we are cutting onions, right? We have to peel the layers, it's not it. So are you giving a layered narrative of, say, Mia identities or Mia socio-political issues in the context of, your field study, if it is in Assam, right? So that is, I think, what they'll be looking for. They might not expect you to do, say 50 to 100, research respondents for any kind of qualitative research. That is just impossible. It is a humongous task. But what happens sometimes is that, people who claim to do ethnographic research does not necessarily provide us with, a thick description that any ethnographic research should provide. So that is, how I'll put it. uh
Thank you so much.
yeah. So I hope I was able to clarify some of your doubts.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
I got that clarification. Thank you so much.
So the question by Debasmita Ghosh, well, Well, Debasmita, I think, it is a very important question, and I'm saying this is important essentially because in India we don't take, research ethics very seriously. Now, I think, it is not possible, entirely or completely possible to represent someone else. But as a researcher, what we can do is that, if the issues that we are studying is something which is being shared by people, by our research respondents, then I think, there is certain level of validity of what we are observing or what we are studying. So if you are a non-indigenous person, it is not about, it is not necessarily a question of being indigenous and non-indigenous, or whether you are an insider or an outsider. I think as a researcher, one of the first things that we have to do is that we have to be honest with our research. We have to be honest to our research participants. We need to be, open and transparent about, how we are going to do our research. So I think, in India, we have a very, very poor record of, maintaining, ethical, standards when we are doing research. So particularly in social science. So And probably, it is always helpful to share, one's work with the communities that we study. For example, in my case also, I was not confident about, say, nationalism in the vernacular or vernacular nationalism. So I submitted my PhD thesis in 2017, and my book only came out in 2023. Now, over a period of, say, 8 to 9 years, I have been, sitting only with one book. Now, what I have been, engaging myself in, organizing talks, right? I have been engaging and organizing, meeting people, sharing my ideas. Then when you feel that, people relate to the kind of arguments that you are making, then I think to a very large extent, you can be quite sure that, you are not making a very, very wrong statement, or you are not making a very, very wrong argument. I think, a researcher, there is no formula, right? In research, there is no formula. You can come up with your own ingenious, you can come up with your own ideas and, based on your own experience. So I cannot give you any kind of, formula in terms of you can do this, you can do that. But then I would, pay, important to the issue of ethics in my research. And second is that, to ensure that, you share your research work as wide as possible, if possible, even with the local community that you are engaging with. So another question is, I rather what is the right time to do fields? Well,
He's doing
what is the right time? When is the right time to go to the field? Well, I really don't know. Right? In a sense, I really don't know when it is the right time to go to the field. But I think that, as a scholar, it is always to have, some amount of preparedness in ourselves, and that preparedness can be in terms of, our readings. So our readings are important. And second is that, I think we have to be very confident about the methodology that we are using. Now, methodology in a sense that, the kind of philosophical underpinnings of the methodology in question. Now, if you're using a quantitative research, if you're a quantitative researcher, and if you are saying that I'm going to use an in-depth interview, I think that is entirely wrong. You're not going to come out with any, any, you know, a research, that can be justified, right? So the methodological grounding has to be correct. That is my point. Now, regarding the time, I think, once, we feel that, because reading can, go, reading can continue, right? You can read even after your PhD. You can read, even when you are in the field. So I think, it really depends, on the researcher, in terms of, your own readings, whether you think that, I have read enough, so let me go to the field. So I think, we should not be engaged too much in readings also, right? Because we get lost, in our own readings, and we get too much consumed with the kind of readings that, we totally forget the value of doing field work, right? Now, for example, if you look at sociology, that is, I think the strength of sociology is about field work. And the more time the more time, we spend in fieldwork, I think that is, the best thing for a sociologist, particularly because it gives us, it enables us to relate theory and field, one, and it also enriches our perspectives in terms of what we learn in class. Otherwise, we end up being an armchair philosopher, right? So I think, we should give a lot of time and space, to do field work and engage with our ideas. Even, the kind of readings that we do in classrooms with our friends, I think we can take them to the field and see, whether these readings are really helpful in unpacking the kind of, complex realities that, that we live with. Is there any more question?
Yeah, so the floor is open for more questions. Is there anyone with questions? You can actually feel free to ask. I I don't think.
I think there is no more
I
question.
think there is no. Hello.
Yeah, this
Am I
one.
audible, sir?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Yes, yes, you're audible. I'm Sudarshan Wankade from IIT Guwahati, MEDS first year student. My
Yes.
question is that I'm just first year student and in first semester, so I don't have much idea about research and research papers. So what can I do? What should be the basics I have to do? And means I have just a quantitative research methodology and qualitative methodology, research methodology in second year. So second sem. So I don't have much idea. So can I read these things from extra some books or do some extra work?
Yeah, Sudarshan, definitely. I mean, if you have, if you have a career plan, where you wanted to do a PhD, maybe, after you complete your master, or I don't know, right? So if you think that, you will be pursuing something, I think uh, it should not necessarily be that, you should be doing a research by enrolling yourself in a PhD. Even without enrolling in a PhD, you can definitely do a research and you can definitely do a
Why?
reading.
How?
And
Why?
today, I think we have a lot of spaces and place where you can learn from. For example, online, there are
Kala
so
wala.
many online workshops that are happening. There are so many online courses. There are books also that are available for online downloads. So I don't, it's not about I don't think it should your degree or anything should bar you from doing any kind of research. Many good researchers are not necessarily someone, people who are in academia. They may not be trained like us. It's not necessary that everyone gets the training, but there can be people, there can be, you can do research in your own ways, right? As long as you follow, the right approach.
Thank you, sir.
So we have a
Sir,
question. Yes. Is there anyone who's
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
ask right now? Yeah,
yes,
there's someone with a question. Also, there's a question in the chat box.
one
Um,
question, sir.
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm a researcher from Mizoram University, and I'm working on this Romboy too. Now I'm the stage of field work, and one thing is that we go with a research question in the field, but what we get in that, they tend to speak on what they want, like what they're interested in it. So my research is on that Romboy, and I'm focusing on these ordinary people, like social history. So, what? How will we cope with that thing? And you have an experience in this Ramboy history, so if you have anything to uh, give suggestion like that.
Yes, yes. I think Shuai Tluang, I think that the question that you are asking is very important. uh, bec- Sometimes, what happen is that as a researcher we go to the field to interview people, and sometimes, we end up being interviewed. That is one possibility. And the other is that, there are, our respondents are not fools, right? Everyone, everyone have their own, way of looking at things. And particularly in a context where, you are working on, something which is very political in nature. So people, the memories of people about the movement can be very, very selective, and the kind of narrative that they want to present before you can be also very, very selective. So therefore, I think that, as a researcher, it is always very important to, be very conscious about the kind of data that we are getting. That is first. And second is that, I think, it is at, in that kind of situation, I don't know, whether it will be the right suggestion or not. I think it might be helpful to diversify your research respondents. So say, for example, in my case, initially I did my fieldwork in ISO. So when I did my fieldwork in ISO, I went to the MNF office. The MNF, is now a political party. Then I get many respondents. Now, when I go to them, they give me a particular narrative about the movement. Now, when I started traveling to different parts of Mizoram, from the southern to, to the north, to the east and the west, then I get, this multiple, very, very complicated narratives about the movement, right? They are very contested in themselves, but then I get a more diverse, diverse perspective of the movement. So my one suggestion is that, it is important to diversify the respondents, in that kind of context. So I hope that that respond to some of your question.
Yes, thank you, sir.
There is one question in the chat box by Marve Sophie. mistakes or misconceptions that. So she's asking that could you share any prevalent mistakes or misconceptions that should be avoided in this process? So, so again, it depends. If you're a quantitative researcher, you already have a theoretical framework in mind, right? You already have everything in place. It is just that you have to operationalize it. So the theoretical framework is already decided by reading your literature. Now, if you are a qualitative researcher, if you're using case study, ethnography, so on and so forth, then it means that you are constructing, your theoretical framework in the process of your research. So I don't think but generally I think what people have is that sometimes they try to fit in their data into existing theoretical framework. Maybe you are a fan of Ranajit Guha, maybe you are a fan of what is it, bell hooks, for example. Maybe you are a fan of Gopal Guru, right? Then sometimes it can be that you try to fit in your data to the framework of what Gopal Guru is talking about, say in the context of humiliation, right? Or you try to fit in your work in the context of what Ranajit Guha is talking about, subaltern studies, whereas your data is saying something entirely different. So I think so therefore we should be quite careful when we are saying that I'm using this theoretical framework, because there has to be a link between your theory, your methods, and as well as the data that you are getting. So these three has to come together, and they have to show that uh, you know the theory as well as the method as well as the data, they are all in the same page, right? So rather, if your approach is that you are fitting in your data into the existing theories, just because you like it, just because you think that this theory is very fancy, it's very nice, it is something which is undercurrent, I think that can lead to to some difficult problems or difficult issues.
Thank you, sir. So, is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? So, I think we don't have any more questions. So, I would like to thank Dr. Rolwa Puya for the session today, and it was a very enriching and informative session. Thank you so much for guiding us through the whole research framework. So if the participants could turn on their camera so that we could take a group pic of the entire session, it would be great. I know it might be difficult for some people, but it doesn't matter where you are. You can just turn on your camera. Can you please turn on your camera? Those who have your camera working, please do turn on your camera. Yes, sir, can you just look at the camera so that we can, take a picture? Yeah. We can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
It's positioned in a very awkward place, so sometimes I don't know which direction I'm looking.
It's okay, but
Because I don't use this what is it called, I don't know, this camera.
camera. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
so
just for a second, we've taken a picture now. Thank you so much, sir. Now I'll be handing over to the convener who will conclude.
So I think my camera is now. So thank you so much to each and everyone, especially Dr. Puya for this session, for agreeing to join us for this enriching session. And I completely know you've been a very hectic schedule with you, but I really appreciate for you being here and helping us, all the participants, as well as us as research scholars, to figure out certain concepts and aspects when we begin writing our papers, or more effectively the whole journey of our PhD. Okay, thank you so much, sir. Then I'm going to conclude the session, and
Thank
we
you,
hope to
everyone.
see you on our next sessions. Then, thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Can you call Rugulda, because I think I don't know how to live stream this thing. End stream. हो जाएगा फिर उसका? कर दो प्रेस एंड स्ट्रीम.
हाँ वो खत्म हो गया ना, वो
हाँ,
हमारा
हाँ.
जी भी लगेगा.
एंड ना.
हाँ एंड
चलो.